Hey guys, I'm Mustached Jr. here, aka Mustached. I'm here to review Guillermo Del Toros' Pinocchio. If you end up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, second and third to my Patreon and PayPal where you can help support me and my channel directly, and fourth to my Discord server where you can join, share your YouTube content, and collab, and do all that fun stuff. And Sheldon will be reminded at the end of the review. With all that out of the way, let's get into Guillermo Del Toros' Pinocchio. So, if it hasn't been made evident from a previous review, there's been quite a few versions of Pinocchio, this one being the third iteration of a Pinocchio movie made this year alone, causing quite a bit of confusion, I'm sure, of why they would, how that even happened so consistently and so close together. But despite that, the first Pinocchio was that weird one that I didn't even watch, but I've heard about it and I've heard other people review it though. Then there was Disney's live-action, partially live-action CGI remake of Pinocchio, which was a disaster of a film that didn't follow any of the, the things of the original Disney Pinocchio. And then there was this version, which was Guillermo del Toro's take on Pinocchio, and taking the form of claymation, which is definitely, as I've come to have known, and if people don't know, it's one of the hardest, mediums to get into film with. So various amounts of respect in that regard in terms of going through that process, because it's never an easy process to mold a face various amounts of times, and it's a very complex system of how you have to do it. But this review is more focused on both the narrative portion of the story as well as the characters, as that's what my reviews have always tended to focus on when it comes to being objective, is focusing on narrative, plot, and story, and the characters. So that's where my focus will be here tonight in this review. So with all of that out of the way, I've seen the trailer for this quite a few times, so I was interested in it and seeing how it would differ from both even the original Disney's Pinocchio and the remake of the more poorly defined Pinocchio, to see where this would necessarily land. And again, I haven't seen the other one that came out before that. Anyway, so this version starts off doing something very different from any other iteration that gets us to do something that no other Pinocchio movie did, which is when we see our narration done by the cricket character, we actually get to see Geppetto's son. We actually get to meet who his son was. His son, his name is Carlo, and we get to see what kind of kid Carlo was. A very bright kid, wanting to follow in his father's footsteps and into building things out of wood. And as they were going about their townly activities of building things out of wood, including a literal Jesus Christ, because religious symbolism is in this movie very heavily, and it ties into the theme as well, among other things that we'll get to. But nonetheless, we get to see that they are acknowledged in this rather small town in this quaint back in the day era of time in Italy. So during this little beginning moment, Carlo lies about something, and I wrote that in my notes, and this is where Geppetto initially mentions how lying is bad and how it'll make your nose grow, so we get that sort of initial message with Carlo, and then after this little montage we get a little bit of a song. Now I will say, promptly now that the songs of Pinocchio, in all iterations, the only one that seems to have has lasted the test of time is the When You Wish Upon a Star, as that has literally become Disney's, like, opening, like, for all set in time of, even as of current, they still use that theme. So obviously that is one of most of Disney's more recognized songs, but outside of that particular song, I would argue that the rest of the Pinocchio songs aren't that particularly that strong or memorable. At least, I mean, I haven't seen the original Disney's Pinocchio in preparation for this, so I don't remember any of the original Disney Pinocchio songs outside of When You Wish Upon a Star. So the songs here, in this iteration, are okay, but I wouldn't call them memorable. There isn't like a powerhouse musical, rendition here. So it hasn't escaped that criticism, though that of all the criticism I can give this movie, that's definitely one of the weaker ones. As, again, I'm not saying that the songs are bad per se, I'm just saying they're not quite either memorable either. They're just sort of there and sort of move the story along, sort of, or are in the moment, depending on which song we are referring to. Anyway, so, as they are to doing their dues of townly activity, one day, during their happening upon church, getting ready to work on their stuff some more, Carlo's already in the building, and I'm not sure why Geppetto was outside of the building. I think he forgot something or other, or he went to go get something. I forget exactly what happens, but nonetheless, we pan upwards from Carlo's perspective as he's in the church, and we see these planes pass by, and one of them drops a literal missile. And we see Geppetto's reaction as he's trying to warn his son to get out. However, the missile does drop and kills Carlo, and that is the end of Carlo's life. So this movie deals with death. It does not avoid it. In fact, as I mentioned just before, it is a very consistent heavy theme throughout the rest of the movie, as we'll see more so with Pinocchio as he enters into the film. And thus, some years pass after this incident. We cut to the cricket, who I'll just keep calling the cricket. I know he has a name, but whatever. And Geppetto has cut himself down to drinking and being a miserable, sad man that has cut himself off from all ties. And he, through the initial sadness, transitions into anger. So this opening sequence is a very emotional little peak. Does something I don't think a lot of the previous movies have done, well, maybe with some exception of the original Disney's Pinocchio, but it really gets us to see a lot more of Geppetto's point of view and how he actually saw his son. We get to hear sort of there's sort of this vagary around it from what I can remember of the original. The remake makes it way more obvious that he had a son, though again they allude to it via a picture. But we don't really know much about what kind of person he was, and here we get to see that. So I think that really creates a additional dynamic to Geppetto. It elevates his character beyond what it is even in Disney's original Pinocchio. There, I would suggest, is exactly what I am saying here. So, from that sadness, he spurs into anger and creates a wooden doll. And as he's on the verge of completion, and then to completion, the spirit these little spirit things are like moving as we see this little montage of him building it. And they form into this blue, ethereal creature, is the best I can describe it as she gives life to this puppet. And thus, she is the one who names him Pinocchio. So, Geppetto wakes up the next day, and seeing Pinocchio, and Pinocchio begins to sing about not knowing what stuff is, essentially, is the song he's kind of going on about. Again, it's an okay song, but I don't know if I would say it's quite memorable, again, in that category of the rest of the songs in this movie. But after kind of spooking him, he apologizes. And the cricket almost gets a song, but he gets cut off, and it seems to be a consistent joke throughout the movie, is that he almost gets to do his little solo musical number, and he consistently gets cut off, except at the end. So, as they're getting ready to, do a montage of whatever time, he's like, oh, stay here, I'm gonna go to church, but Pinocchio's too curious and too, I don't know what stuff is. He's just sort of born with some sense of knowledge, but not like what a lot of stuff is. He just has a sense of words, which is like a very, very youthful thing in mind. So this is where the people are freaking out as he kind of places himself out in the open, and people are like, oh, this is like a monster or something, or, things of that nature. And I don't know, I feel like this little moment here is like I don't know if it's like, it was supposed to be like symbolically like him being like a young gay character coming out kind of deal. I don't know if that was the intent. Like, that's what I personally read it as when I saw it in the movie. Because that usually ties together, but it's not always consistently the case. But anyways, point being, the people freak out. And he lies, and his nose begins to grow when confronted by Geppetto. And this is where he reinforces Geppetto to now Pinocchio, though, about the nose growing on the head, or the face, I should rather say. But during this little conflict, we get our first recognition of something else, is that during their little, or after their little kerfuffle, Pinocchio, I don't know if I wrote this in my notes, but he gets hit by this, wagon, and he dies, quote-unquote, dies, and he meets the character you see on the poster here, another ethereal being. This appears to be the sister of the other one, and she says that you are not able to die, or you are able to die, technically, but you always come back, is sort of the general shtick, because you are not a human. And Pinocchio initially sees this as a really good thing, as he, has this hourglass that's presented to him in his time of how long he needs to wait, and she tells him that each time he passes over, that the time will increase. Which, again, she says explicitly, you will be here more than once. I know this. Let's be real here. So, as we cut back to him waking up, we see the other thing that this movie deals with is that this movie deals with fascism. Oh boy. So we have a father character and a new character. Instead of Lampwick, we get a new character called Candlewick. He's introduced earlier in the movie, and his father is a fascist, so he's the son of a fascist, and he's, learning the ways of that regime or lifestyle, doing the salute, the infamous salute, I shall say, and thus we know that this movie is not being at all subtle about what these type of characters are in the slightest. They literally call him a fascist in the movie. The dialogue comes from them, not another character, so they seem to be proud of their fascism. After this little kerfuffle, Geppetto almost is on the verge of already calling Pinocchio his son, but doesn't quite reach there quite yet. All the while, Pinocchio is setting out to get ready to go to school. The fascist guy, the father's like, hey, you need to send your son to school, because he's like, he's weird, so you gotta straighten him out. Again, I said straighten him out go back in the order of things, but again, my mind also simultaneously just went back to again, oh yeah, because fascism did the whole thing away with, the homophobic, the education of, LGBT, material, as they burned the books, the Nazis did. So, again, I don't know if this is supposed to be, a coming out kind of story as well. There are that's the second instance where immediately I sidelined into that side of thinking, so, it's definitely possible in subtext, at least. So, anyways, we follow, then, a monkey as this new character, as he goes to the owner of this circus, and I'll just call him the owner, I don't remember his name. I don't think they call him Stromboli. I think he has a different name. But he initially sings about how he wants to be at the top of this circus ring twice. They've already been there to the top before, the pinnacle of, their performance, and he's trying to get there again with something else. So, Pinocchio, being frustrated as to what he is currently, points to Jesus and says, we're both made of wood, and again, I can't help but make the third comparison to being gay. Hey, if Jesus were more symbolically done in a humanoid way instead of made out of wood, the context would be one for one. Hey, we're both made of flesh, so what's the actual difference, right? Again, the third context to, I don't know, is Pinocchio supposed to be gay? Seriously, I'm legitimately curious if Guillermo Del Toro had that in mind when making the character. It definitely doesn't pop up in the original Disney's Pinocchio, to my knowledge. Again, I haven't seen it in such a long time. I could be wrong, but this is the third instance where I can, in subtext, kind of gauge that there's some sort of, again, that sort of text within the work here. But he is, again, sort of comparing himself to this wooden figure who is worshipped. So there's, again, here, because of, I forget how Pinocchio learns of Carlo, but I think after getting the book, he gains the knowledge from either Geppetto or the cricket, from someone. Point being is that at this point of the film, Pinocchio is very eager to try his best to be Carlo. Try to be this normal boy, the fourth subtext, the normal boy. I'm gonna say it. I think there's a very clear subtext that Pinocchio is gay. I don't know. Again, that's the fourth subtext. And again, I didn't actually write this in my review. It's just something that is popping in my head as I'm looking at my own notes. I'm going like, oh yeah, that could be seen as a subtext to like, interesting. Anyway, so the owner of the circus meets with Pinocchio, and much like the original, gets tricked. Like the original Pinocchio, he gets tricked. Instead of going to school, he's like, hey, you can be a star, and I'll offer you all this cool stuff like food and drink of hot chocolate. And Pinocchio's already a fan of hot chocolate, so he's like, yeah, okay, that sounds cool, I'll get in. So he starts to sing a separate song that isn't quite as catchy as I Have No Strings, which is the other popularized Pinocchio song, the only one that I can think of off the top of my head. And he's talking about sort of wanting different things at this point in time as this more scripted song, and the people are eating it up. They love it, of course. It's a puppet without strings. He's free, but he's a sideshow. Again, the freak, and how many references are just like grasping, even in the original. Even that one sort of kind of gets to that, but I don't know. This one seems way more reinforced and sort of a lot more gay context. But again, it's all subtext. So anyway, Geppetto starts to pull Pinocchio away. So this is actually the first time Pinocchio dies. Sorry, I put that earlier in my notes, and I actually put it also later in my notes. So this is where he gets hit by the vehicle. I said that earlier, I know, but it happens at this point. But again, Pinocchio comes back. And so after he awakens this first time, the fascist father sees that, oh man, this Pinocchio, he cannot die. He would be the ultimate the ultimate child soldier that we can just send out to war. He could just die a bunch of times and don't worry about it. We can just keep on sending him out there. That'd be great. But he also gets told in a because they keep using very key words here. Some of the dialogue is very strong and some of it's very weak. Like, literally referring to the father as fascist is a bit obvious since they do the Heil Hitler thing. But I do like the recontextualized of other words, like the phrase of burden. I like how they use the word burden here in the uses of that word, in which he is told he is the burden, and how the cricket explains what a burden is around this context. And I like when the cricket does this for these little heavier words that like children might not understand. Again, this is a very obviously more emotional roller coaster, like probably even more than in some instances, even some more in the original. But I gotta have respect for that as well. So Pinocchio chooses, instead of going to war, he's like, I don't want that. So he chooses, since the father is torn between, forced to go to war or pay off this money that you're owed for this contract. So he chooses the contract and the money. And this is where the cricket gets stuck in the jar for a good portion. The cricket's journey here is a little bit more oomph than obviously the Disney remake, but I still think it's not quite as powerful as having Jiminy throughout the persistent movie. even up all the way until the transformation sequence, which isn't in this movie. Since there is no Pleasure Island in this, or whatever it's called, or Happy Island, or whatever it's called. Anyway, so as they're setting up, Pinocchio sings another song, and Candlewick gets set off to war. He's a child soldier, getting ready for training. And so, Pinocchio, alongside that, he's doing like the sort of the early Captain America thing, where he's like, kind of, singing about the war, and, you gotta be proud for your country, you gotta, do the good thing and fight the fight and all that stuff. So that's sort of the song he's sort of propagandizing on his end. Too little of his acknowledgement, obviously, since he's a kid. So the other puppets, kind of strung along by the monkey, get to talk to him and tell him to go home, since the monkey starts to feel a sort of sympathy for Pinocchio after seeing the owner take more and more of the money, and showing that he has no interest in actually sending any of the money Pinocchio's way, even though Pinocchio was the one who insisted that, I don't want any of the money, send it to my father, so on and so forth. This is where we see Geppetto start to get so worried that he sets out to follow them via sea trek, but this is where he gets swallowed by a sea monster, or AKA, though he's not named Monstro in the film, for the sake of simplicity, I'll just call it Monstro. And so, the cricket is in tow with Geppetto from this point for pretty much the rest of the bulk of the film. So, this is where the owner doubles down, and he's telling Pinocchio that he is the owner, and even though you do not have, even though this kid doesn't have strings, he is the owner. He is the groomer, if you will. That language, we love to use it. I'm gonna mold you into this, idle position. However, with the monkey's help, and, for their biggest show yet, Pinocchio makes a mockery of the song, using the words of poop and shit a lot in this song, in this version of the song, rather. And as a result, he gets shot, literally, with a gun. He gets killed a second time. And this is where he's told that, while he's still happy, like, oh yeah, I'll keep living, like, yeah, it's great. And he gets warned, like, yeah, but everyone else is human. You do realize that everyone else will die, so you'll still be around, and that sort of suffering is, in of its own, a little bit, perhaps worse, if anything, to, prolong that sort of lifestyle. Anyways, so after he comes back, he ends up with the training camp, so he ends up elsewhere, and now the fascists have a hold of him, the father has a hold of him, and he's with Candlewick. And this is where, again, the mimicry of the dialogue is where it's strong, where Pinocchio copies what the cricket said to him to Candlewick, so I actually really appreciate that. So they're preparing for fake war, and they match up, and it's Candlewick versus Pinocchio in this instance. However, during their little debacle, they end up tying, according to both their flags being raised at the same time. However, the father is not a fan of this, so he tells Candlewick to shoot Pinocchio. Since, the father already knows that Pinocchio cannot die, but he's trying to get something out of the son in this scene. However, this scene also contains something instantaneous also happening, as the location that they are training is training in is suddenly bombed. And we see in the process, I believe this is where Candlewick dies. And if anything else, we also see more prominently the father dying on screen. Him falling off of the surface and hitting a rock on a long plummet down after this little kerfuffle. But Pinocchio gets really tied up by the owner, and the monkey is so used to getting abused by him, and he's like, you know what, I'm done with this, I'm gonna help Pinocchio officially. So they both attack, and through the process, after freeing Pinocchio, I forget how the owner also dies. Yes, there's a lot of death in this movie. So yeah, they, after the fact, after getting into the water, get swallowed also by Monstro. So here he reunites with Geppetto and Cricket, and when he starts lying, after a good deal of trying, just being happy that they're finally reunited, this is where the father says, oh, it's bad that you're lying, but, we're in desperate times, so lie to get us out of the situation. So this is interesting, because the Disney remake also had Pinocchio lie on purpose, and it was to get the key so he can get out on his own. Here, by comparison, we have Pinocchio lying on purpose, and the father explicitly says to Pinocchio this time, only this once. Only lie in desperate desire. There's a very distinct difference to me between the two scenes, as one has a character explicitly tell Pinocchio, lying is usually still not okay, but under extreme circumstances, this is for our survival, then fine, lie. I actually, believe it or not, I actually prefer this over both Pinocchios, as I think that there is some beautiful nuance here with what they're trying to say, even if it's explicit, is that, again, lying is generally not okay, but it's not inherently always going to be like, you should never ever lie is like the pure altruist, like, goody two-shoes, like, version of it. It's like, well, that's not realistic, is it? No, it's not. Sometimes, real life is going to get messy, and lying is still going to cause for Pinocchio for the nose to grow, but out of this situation, it was for desperation, and again, as Geppetto reinforces, it's to help them get out. It's to help them traverse from the boat to the upper part of the blowhole so that they can get sucked out of it. And which they do, successfully escape. However, their escape is almost thwarted, as they are chased after being spit out. But Pinocchio wises up and uses one of these various bombs that are in the water, because it's wartime still, so there are bombs in the water. And so he blasts Monstro. And surprise, surprise, Pinocchio doesn't get out of the situation quite significantly, so he dies again, but this time he's yelling to get back. He's like, no, I have to get back, Geppetto's still there. And she's like, no. The only way you can do it is if you break the rules, if you go back to being, or if you choose to be a human, but you have to choose to break the rules. So this is a very distinct difference between every iteration of Pinocchio here, where it's not about learning the little lesson, just learning the little lessons here, which they're still here to a degree. Obviously, we have Pinocchio reinforcing to Candlewick, and we have what Geppetto says to him. We still have all of that still here. Rather, on top of that, though, we have this additional scene, or theme rather, of the sort of humanity of this character. You were sort of immortalized as this, being, and what that would have meant before, and what that would mean now, versus, Geppetto's life is on the line. So, you will gain humanity through breaking the rules, which is a very interesting sort of way of doing this. So he fulfills that, and as the process dies in the process, but there is something I've left out throughout this entire review on purpose. You see, Cricket got told at the very beginning that he would get one wish if he did this job of sort of being Pinocchio's conscience, which again I would argue isn't done primarily the strongest in this movie, even though he tries to argue that he did the best that he could. I would have still liked to have seen Cricket follow him despite getting trapped, like follow him in the war scenes and get through all that kerfuffle too. Just to reinforce that at least he was consistently there, even if he didn't have, because he doesn't have much to add when he's with Geppetto, so I don't see why they couldn't just bring him with Pinocchio. Again, a little bit of a criticism there, but so the Cricket have wanting what he had wanted before, which is to just be this writer. He sees that he has been following this as closely as he can, so he is the one who wishes Pinocchio come back to life. So, here we see, again, much like the beginning, we actually see a much grimmer ending with a weird sort of like, what's that all about, sort of. I think it's a very, comparative to the novel version of Pinocchio. I think it was trying to invoke a little bit more of that into the ending of this movie. Whereas we see a new montage near the end of the movie where Pinocchio sees the cricket die, places the cricket in this little box and places it in his heart. Then he has to witness Geppetto die and get over that and put to rest Geppetto and have the gravesite put up. And we sort of see Pinocchio just sort of start to wander off, not knowing truly where his next adventures lie. And during the afterlife, since we've seen it a few times, we see the cricket is now there, and during the end credit sequence, the cricket finally gets his full song, his full rendition, that he has fulfilled his life's work of, making sure Pinocchio got to this point. And that was Guillermo Del Toros' Pinocchio, and I must say, that was a very interesting movie by comparison. It does, as I mentioned, have some of the themes of the original. There is an additional theme of this sort of recognition of him as a not human character, and sort of working that into the theme of the afterlife as an additional theme here that is not present in any of the other iterations, as well as the various subtexts that I was able to start picking out in my own review when I was not, when I wasn't even looking for that, and I wasn't even I never typed it, but when I was thinking of it, there is a clear, there were various subtext of Pinocchio being a gay character throughout this movie, and I don't know if that's intentional or not currently, but for the sake of argument, I will say sure it is for now. So I think it does a very successful subtext of that. So yeah, there is a lot going on here. like I said, there are still some criticisms I had with the cricket as a character not following in the journey. There were some of the songs that just weren't that strong or memorable here as well. But I feel like the songs are more so of a pastime rather than like sort of these more, it's not like a Disney musical, obviously. It's not going to have that power oomph behind it, unfortunately, is the side effect of it not being a Disney-owned thing. So I do appreciate their attempt at it, nonetheless. Like, they tried, obviously, to withhold that aspect of Pinocchio. And the additional themes are greatly appreciated as well. And my gripes are sort of more minuscule at best, with the cricket being sort of, again, not as present. He's still a pretty cool or good character overall, I would say. And my criticisms of the songs are that they're okay at best, but not memorable. So I would still give this movie a solid 7 out of 10. I don't think the two issues I have with this are warranted enough to, like, say that's a direct, like, infringement of, like, oh, that's like a plot issue necessarily, or like anything of that nature. So I would still say relatively a very strong iteration of the Pinocchio movie. So I give major props to Guillermo Del Toro, and I give the movie again a 7 out of 10. So that is my full review of this version of Pinocchio, and if you ended up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, fourth to my Discord server. Any and all donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye!